So we'll enter into a time now of just response, just on this message. If you had time to study it throughout the last week, or if God spoke to your heart something today through this passage of Hebrews, this is the time we have to share that, just as a reminder, to encourage one another, to teach one another based on this passage. Next week we will gather for a time of just testimonies of anything that God is doing in our lives. But if God has placed something on your heart to share with the body today, I encourage you to do so. I know one of the things that struck out to me that struck my mind was Paul mentions many times in Corinthians, but in 1 Corinthians he talks about the way that we were worldly, and then he says, but you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified. In other words, those things have taken place. And in 2 Corinthians he says, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. And so there's this reality that we are new and we are becoming new. And I was thinking of why, I think you're right, Justin, so many believers just think, okay, once I die, then finally I will just become new. And I'm just thinking of the world that we live in, where everything is on demand right away, where you can go to the fast food restaurant, and if your burgers and fries aren't ready for you in like 4 or 5 minutes, I start to grumble. At least if the streaming service isn't working, we have microwaves. Everything is like right now, immediately. And I don't realize how much that is just in my brain, that everything should take place that way. And what happens is that translates into every area of our life. I remember right out of college working at a gym and meeting with people for nutrition and training, and they would get upset at me after like a month because nothing had changed, and they had lived a certain way for like 20 years. And after a month, they hadn't completely gone back. And this idea that I have to have these conversations like, look, you were eating this way and not doing these things for 20 years. Maybe it'll take 20 years to get back there, but it's this slow process. And I think the same is true, right? That sanctification, that transformation, right? God's not interested in behavior modification for us. We can do that all day long. That heart transformation where we become more like him is this process. And I think that's why Paul also talks about running the race, finishing, continuing on. Even maybe it's years that we're striving, begging for something to change in our hearts, to overcome this or whatever that may be. And that if we will not give up, that is taking place. And so he came, he fulfilled the forgiveness, but he's transforming our hearts, and it's a process. So I know I encourage you guys to continue with that process. So these 2 mics are open if you want to come up front or go back and share what God has placed on your heart.
Last May, when we had the last 2 teachings on Hebrews, I actually wasn't here because I was sick then. So I had a lot of fun this week going back and listening to those 2. And they left me with some questions. And then when I dug into chapter 8, a lot of the questions were answered. And then Justin did a great job filling in my blanks. But one of the things that I came across, the word seated at the right hand, that phrase, of course, had heard it lots of times before, but always kind of wondered about it. And jumping ahead to where John 19:30, Jesus said, "It is finished." This ties into him being seated. And what I found was that "it is finished" is the English translation of the Greek word tetelestai, which was the last thing Jesus said before he died. And it comes from a verb which means to bring an end, to complete, to accomplish. It's a crucial word because it signifies the successful end to a particular course of action. It means more than just I survived. It means I did exactly what I set out to do. But there's more here than the verb itself. It is in the perfect tense in Greek. That's significant because the perfect tense speaks of an action which has been completed in the past with results continuing into the present. It's different from the past tense, which looks back to an event and says, this happened. The perfect tense adds the idea that this happened and it is still in effect today. When he cried out, "It is finished," he meant it was finished in the past, it is still finished in the present, and it will remain finished in the future. When he died, he left no unfinished business behind. So when he says he was seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty, we have a God who serves us from a position of all authority, as Justin said. And this next little part is from David Gusick, so you have to take into consideration the fact that this is someone else interpreting, but this kind of just struck me. It says, he's seated in heaven in contrast to the continual service of the priesthood under the Levites. The tabernacle and the temple of the Old Covenant had beautiful furnishings, but no place for the priest to sit down because their work their work was never finished. The work of Jesus is finished, therefore he is seated in heaven.
So I really enjoyed the sermon today. Specifically, something that you kept saying, Justin, was just the ability to understand the heart issue. And something that has been really, and you said this is our place to be honest and to share our struggles. And something for me that I've always had a heart for, but I'm still trying to understand, is how to parent and how to raise children who love the Lord. I think it's so interesting. For me, I was an only child, so something I always share with people, it's so new for me to see like sibling interaction because I never had that growing up. And to understand when you have these children who are sinful human beings and you're raising them up with each other and then they're sinning with each other. And I think it's been a very challenging dynamic. My oldest is 11 and I have found it to be very humbling. It is the hardest job I've ever done. And then on top of it, the Lord asked me to homeschool. So I'm with them all the time. So it's just such a refining process for myself and them. But I think for me, what you said was so interesting and what the Lord has really shown me for the last few years specifically is it's not my job to change their hearts. That's his job. And I think for me, as a mother, you desire your children to be in heaven with the Lord. And I think just like it breaks our Father's heart when we sin, it breaks my heart when I see my children sinning or sinning with each other. And so it's really been such a hard process for me to know how to share, every day opening the Word with them and discussing their sin and not trying to beat them over the head with God's Word of like, how come you don't understand this? We'll sit there in the morning and I'll open the Word and then 5 minutes later they're doing exactly what we discussed in the Word. But I think something that a wise woman that I have read many of her books, she talked about it's a well-worn path. And she talked about being so frustrated. And you mentioned this, Justin, how it's a sanctification, it's a process. And even you, Chris, had said, like, we want instant results. And for so many years, I thought, like, oh, my children, they're going to come to the Lord when they're 2, and it's just going to be such a great, easy process, like the rest of my, so, naive. But for me, as my children get older and you still see these things, it's really challenging for me. It's really challenging. And I've always desired to just have a joyful, peaceful home. And sin doesn't always provide that. And I think that's for me, been such a kind of sitting, not necessarily seeing it through God's eyes, like meaning I'm God, but just understanding like what our sin does and how it separates us. And, but at the same time, that through a parent and through what he has shown me, how love covers a multitude of sins. And as a mother, how we continue to love and forgive and provide, my kids, even though they're being hurtful to me or to their siblings, I'm still providing that meal. I'm still cleaning their clothes. I'm still reading them the books. I'm still doing those things. And I think it's just such a beautiful picture of how the Lord is with us and how he consistently is by our side transforming us. He never gives up on us in our, even when like he did these things before we were willing to give our lives to him. And it's kind of like with our children, like we do these things in a relationship and a love for them. And it's just that well-worn path. Like a path doesn't get worn overnight. It's a consistent thing with our children, with ourselves, with our communities. And I think it was just such a good reminder of knowing like it's ultimately the Lord's job to change each of our hearts. And I think oftentimes I get in that striving mode of like, I have to what am I doing wrong? Like, what can I do different? Which is a good question to ask, but it also, I oftentimes feel Satan's just condemnation of like, you're just doing it all wrong. And I think for me is just that surrender. And so I just really enjoyed what you said of just that, the beauty of what God did in the new covenant and how he is all about the heart. And I think so often I have to, like, even I think you had mentioned behavior modification. So oftentimes we think of that as the first thing in parenting. And the Lord keeps telling me like, it's the heart. And I honestly, like I said, for me, it has been the most challenging thing. I like last night in my mudroom, I'm like, my kids were having a heyday with each other. And I'm like, Lord, I have asked you so many times for wisdom. I need you to give me wisdom. And like tears streaming down my face of just desiring to please the Lord with my children. And so I could just ask for prayer that this season with the new one and for the responsibility is something I take very seriously. And I just long to know how to bring them up. So I would appreciate your prayer.
Say something here. This is so central to the new covenant, to the gospel regarding parenting. It's much more about who we are than what we say or what we teach. And the character we need as parents is available within the body. Character is something that we have as a shared asset. And so the encouragement is for Katie. The encouragement is you don't need to tell her what to do. Okay, that's not how to help her. Pray for her, and then be available. And this is motivation for us to more and more become the parents with that character that we each lack individually. But collectively, we have a community character that is sufficient. And so that's my point. It's what our kids need is who we're becoming. The character is caught, not taught. It just isn't. We don't learn character from somebody telling us what it looks like. It's like osmosis. It's absorbed, and it starts as a baby, and it continues from there. So that's my point. We have it. Be available. And let's use this as motivation to become more and more like Christ and cooperate with his transformation in our hearts.
The idea that we talked about today, that where we are transformed is in community, and I absolutely believe in it. And we're new here, and it's hard because we're just in a really hard season. We're living with my parents. My dad's got health issues. My mom's grieving because her life has totally changed with my dad's health issues, and it's not what they planned for their final years or this season, the retiring season. And then we're living in the house and homeschooling our kids. So I just feel very stuck in this middle place. And really like, okay, God, like my people that I've always kind of turned to are all very far away. Like we just moved here. We're starting new. And it was so cool because God, he knows us and he knows what we need. And so I had been asked by a woman in Maine who's a worship leader if I could join her for a conference, because those of us who play guitar and lead worship as women are few and far in between. And she needed a guitarist and a co-worship leader. And so I said yes, and that was in November. But then like 3 weeks ago, she goes, hey, would you want to come help me with this retreat in Raymond, which is like around the corner from my old house? And I said, sure, why not? Like, that sounds great. Unbeknownst to me, a bunch of my friends showed up. And I ended up staying with a woman who is sort of, you know, as women, we have like women in our lives that are like our wise women that like can talk truth to us and have been through a lot of stuff, and because they're older and wiser. And so I ended up being able to stay with her. She like made me dinner at like 10 o'clock at night and just stayed up and talked with me and prayed with me and got up at 6 a.m. with me to have breakfast and, you know, see me off to the conference. And then at the retreat, there was just like two women that literally mentored me for years. And when I, you know, had my fourth child and was like, I had heart issues, so I couldn't like do anything in my house. They used to come into my house every week and they would do my dishes and my laundry and just speak Jesus over me. And I did not know they were going to be there. And it was just like, God was like, I know you're in this really hard place and you need people who can just wrap themselves around you and encourage you in the moment that you're in. And then there ended up being a woman there who had literally just walked through the same exact thing that I'm in with her parents. And she just spent time with me. Like, okay, these are the hard places. And this is where, you know, God can transform your mind from those, you know, when you're in that place and you're sort of, like my mom and I used to be really good friends and best friends. And right now she's in crisis and I'm trying to, you know, do things, and it just has rocked our relationship a little bit. And so just her encouragement of like how to kind of walk that out, to be thankful for what we have and really be an encouragement to my mom versus, you know, being grumbly. It was so the Lord. And I just feel like community is so important, and being able to find people within your community that you can be really honest with and not be afraid to be yourself, and it's just so important. And so I just really appreciate that, because it really is where we are transformed and where we get the tools to connect to Jesus in different ways, because we can't all figure it out on our own. So thank you.
I was going to say something a little more, but you have said so much, both of you, all three of you. We're blessed and want to be blessings to others. We have Katie and her husband, and all the kiddos that live next door to us. And as I was trying to think about the message and the idea of coming alongside, the koinonia, that we have the Spirit within us. And as we come together, then the Spirit is coming together at the same time. And it shouldn't be any surprise to any of us, but we're all here for a reason, that He has called us. And He's called us to come alongside one another. And we are so blessed to have Katie and Casey and the 5 kiddos next door. And He prepared us for this, because we had Reed and Megan and they're 4 next to us for 3 years. And as Justin and Aaron and Philip and Reed are finding, I needed time to start to figure out what it means to be a grandpa, what it means to be a brother in Christ, and why we are here to really encourage and support one another. And we're not all in the same place relationally, in terms of relation-wise, but we're in different places in our walk, and it is He that provides the difference. We just have to show up. And I'm looking forward to this winter when we're going to have more kids over at our house It's recorded, so I can't get out of that. Just to have the kids get together, have the moms get together, and have that community that you're describing and in need of, and we're all in need of. And yeah, it's a great thing. We're here for one another to serve Him.